This is Money Made Simple, the financial podcast that keeps it simple and gets to the point.
Kia ora and welcome back to part 2 of our retirement podcast with Jane Wrightson, New Zealand's Retirement Commissioner. Thanks for staying on for another chat, Jane. We talked in the previous episode about what retirement looks like in New Zealand now, some of the challenges, particularly around financial literacy and raising those levels. Most of our listeners to this podcast are probably in the younger demographic, so retirement is potentially 20, 30, 40 years away. I thought it would be quite interesting to talk a little bit about where retirement is going, how it might evolve over the coming decades, and some of the unique challenges that you can see ahead of us, and how we can plan and prepare ourselves for that. I hope you're up for that chat.
I'll do my best.
Great. So if we start with some of the maybe emerging differences or changes that you can see in retirement, not just in New Zealand, there may be some global trends as well.
Firstly, most people don't seriously start thinking about retirement until they hit their 50s in reality. I'm sure there are some very good, dedicated young people that are much smarter than I was, but life gets in the way.
It does.
It does just a bit. So I wouldn't panic too much about that. The ability for KiwiSaver to start young and set and forget is the biggest trick to this. Retirement in the future will be different for many different kinds of people like it is now. And retirement I'm using as when you leave the workforce, right?
Yep.
It's not the same as pension age. So when you choose to leave the workforce, assuming you're in it, there's a thing the actuaries are talking about now called FORO, fear of running out.
Oh,
because of our
I love a new acronym.
FORO,
Yeah.
Watch the FORO. Because of our increasing longevity. Let's say you leave the workforce at, say, 65 for the moment, the pension age. If you're a woman in particular, you might be thinking that you're funding another 30 years, which is a bit horrific.
That's a long time.
It's a very long
Yes.
time, which is why people are starting to work longer than 65 now, because while they can work, they generally do. And of course, some people have to work. They haven't got enough money saved. There is a longer period of retirement to fund. What your health situation will be interesting. We may have a longer lifespan, but will we be healthy?
Yes.
Because if we're not, health costs start to rise considerably. And future retirees are going to be a little less likely to own their home outright or be on the property ladder at all, and that will cause some trouble. Partly because you can't easily pay off a mortgage when you're just on the pension. You need to work as well to get that cleared if you can. Partly because social housing, there's just not enough of it. And there isn't enough social housing or even private housing, that is aimed for the older population. What are we building now? We're building 3-level townhouses. Oh, that's really helpful. What we really need is single level with a lift. So there's lots and lots of issues.
So living longer, retiring later potentially, or maybe continuing to work in a sort of more hybrid.
Yeah.
Maybe reducing your hours over time. Do you think that will become a bit more common?
I absolutely do. People work, post the pension age, people work because they have to or because they want to. But the easiest way to transition from work to not work, I think, is to step ladder. There are too many stories, particularly of men who knock off work and then die within the year.
See, I think retirement just sounds glorious. I can't wait
I
to
know.
pot around the garden and read the paper. And
That's right. And if that's enough for you, that's perfect,
Yeah.
right? But people want more.
Yeah.
And this is where retired people come into their own, because the volunteer workforce in this country is heavily stacked by retirees. That most of the charities in this country would not survive without retired people volunteering their time.
So they might stop earning
money,
a
but they
wage,
still
but they
contribute.
yes, of course, and that's really important.
And if you're Māori, of course, and your home patch, they're seriously active on the marae.
And more grandparents are getting involved with their grandchildren as well, right?
When you think about the cost of childcare, grandparents are a godsend, right? If you're lucky enough to be in the same town as your parents, that they can look after your children, saves you an enormous amount of money. And this generation who are on the housing ladder, of course, they've got really big mortgages, really big mortgages. They're going to take a while to pay off.
I'm going to be paying mine off forever, it feels like.
Well, it always does when you take one out, and they do get a bit more manageable over time, but it's always a scary amount of money you borrow, isn't it?
Especially when you buy in Auckland. Youch.
Especially when you buy in Auckland.
Yeah.
As a Wellingtonian, might I suggest there are other places to live?
In terms of some of the key mechanisms for retirement, like NZ Super, like KiwiSaver, can we chat about those for a little bit?
Mm-hmm.
Do you see the policies around New Zealand superannuation changing at all? For example, the age of eligibility that comes up sometimes. It's not very popular at election time, I don't think, to talk about raising it. But do you think that's inevitable?
No, it's not inevitable. The age of eligibility here is 65, plus some residency requirements. That's about the middle of the pack for OECD countries. If you take the tax off NZ Super for a moment, it's going to rise over the next 40 years to something like about 6.6% of GDP. And you go, is that too much for approximately a quarter of the population?
Yeah, true.
I don't think so. Not really.
No, and how does that compare internationally?
It's average.
Right.
It's seriously average. Now, there are a number of people who wail and moan and say the country can't afford it, and it's true, it's a government spending choice. The people who wail and moan about that are, generally speaking, people who are professionals in nice suits quite often, who will be okay in their own retirement.
Right.
And I worry about everybody else.
Yeah.
Right? So by the time you hit 65, you've got a number of inequities turning up. If the government of the day wanted to raise the age, and they talk about it in opposition, and don't tend to in government, but you never know, I would say a number of things. Firstly, it needs to be a cross-party accord. It cannot lurch around. Secondly, it would be so sensible to do it as a package, right? So if you're going to tinker with the age, then what are you going to do to incentivise KiwiSaver to rebalance the books, right? And thirdly, you have to give it a long enough runway. So it isn't going to affect the books today, right? You've got to give people 10 years' notice, in my view, if not more. So if you are really going to play with the system, you'd go, okay, put the age up to 67 maybe, incentivise KiwiSaver, increase employer contributions, increase the government contribution, and talk more about how you can help people make the transition. And then have a specific set of policies for the people that get caught in the middle, which will be women, Māori, Pacifica and manual workers who can't work past 65 very easily, and go, what kind of support will you give them for the transition benefit for those that haven't managed to amass what they need?
Do you think that it should, in any situation, be means tested? So you're talking about the guys in the suits who are like, nah, they're not worried because they've got personal savings and investments and they know they're going to probably be on the Riviera at 67. But a lot of the New Zealand population are not in that situation. Is there an argument for means testing it?
There is an argument for means test. I mean, it is income testing, really. If you're already earning a reasonable job, let's say you're earning in a job that's over $100,000 a year, is it right that you also claim the super? Could well be quite a smart idea to think about it. The trouble with it is that it makes a system that's simple right now quite complicated.
Yes.
Australian super is means tested, but they've got a very different system over there. But I would not knock it out of the basket of policy options, because just putting the age up and not doing anything else is the worst thing to do.
Okay. So in that basket, you also mentioned KiwiSaver and specifically raising the contribution level. At the moment, the minimum contribution is 3% for individuals and for their employers.
That's right.
Would you like to see it go up incrementally, or what do you think is the magic number?
We published a paper last year which worked through a number of the options so that people could understand the wider environment around it. I was quite keen to say that contribution should be 6%, and my policy people talked me down from that because they're the brains of my outfit, not me. And the reason they talked me down is that there is such a thing as oversaving. You don't want to be struggling to put food on the table and have a healthy
money
that's right. The short answer is, for a lifetime of contribution for KiwiSaver, the right number at this point is 4% minimum contribution for employer and employee. And that will pretty much set you up. And if you're wealthier than that, sure, invest it in other places or put some more and it doesn't really matter. But 4 plus 4 is good. The trouble with 3 plus 3 is that it was meant to have changed by now. It hasn't. Governments have been lazy about this over time.
So that was the plan when it was sort of set up by Michael Cullen that
Correct.
it would... Right.
Correct. When you think about Australia, which is 12% employer contribution, you think,
How long did they take to get there?
Not that long.
Right.
Long. It's just increased from, I think, 10 or 11 to 12 this year. The Aussie system's different because the Australian pension is means tested and is 67, and that's what people here go, oh, just don't do what Australia's doing. And you go, yeah, but the Australian private savings scheme at 12% employer contribution is massive.
Yeah.
So Australians are much wealthier than
We're
New
talking
Zealanders.
trillions, aren't we?
We are, because of their really robust private savings scheme, and that's the bit we don't have. So that's what I mean when I say if you're going to tinker with one piece of the puzzle, which is NZ super eligibility, you'll have to tinker with the other side, which is private provision.
Which is a really big project. And I can see why it's not necessarily something that the political parties are keen to talk about, but they're going to have to, right? This conversation has to happen.
They will. And again, all my job is to say, here's the facts as we know it. We are a very data-driven organisation. The opinions I have and the things I'm talking about are all based on very clear research and data and analysis that we provide. And I think that's our job as a commissioner. There was an idea floating around that people should be able to invest with more than one KiwiSaver provider. And I go, really? Why? If you've got enough money to invest, you've probably got KiwiSaver and other stuff. If you're not a very sophisticated person, then, and that includes me, then a single KiwiSaver provider is good enough, thank you very much. You run the risk of, if you've ever worked in the States, and I think in England, you have different pots of retirement money with different employers because it's not portable, and you end up getting thoroughly muddled up.
Don't you end up paying other people to sort that all out for you and
do.
gather up all your funds?
You do.
Yeah.
So this, the
money-making scheme.
The KiwiSaver system here is simple, beautifully designed, and long may it stay that way, I say.
So those you're keen on some conversations around the edges, but at the essence, KiwiSaver is a simple savings scheme and you want to keep it like that.
Absolutely.
For people.
So change the employer contributions, improve those. There's also, employer contributions aren't required for workers under 18 and over 65. And you go, why? It's stupid.
If you're working,
you're working. So get rid of that nonsense.
Yeah.
Get rid of employers doing total REM. So your $100 a week that you earn from them include your KiwiSaver. No. The $100 a week that you earn off them needs to be that plus KiwiSaver. That's the point of the scheme. And extend the government contributions for those on parental leave to those who can't make their own contributions. They moved the scheme last year halfway. Fairly typical politically, isn't it? Halfway, so that if you put your contributions in, the government will top up the employer contributions while you're on parental leave. Good.
That's great.
But it's the most expensive part of your life, having a baby, right? So there are people who won't be able to do that. The government could still put the employer contributions in. And that's a core thing around women in particular, which is why our balances are generally speaking a bit less.
Yes. So we don't know exactly, if I'm preparing for my retirement in about 20 years, lives about 30, there could be some changes that occur, but you think most of those changes there'll be a fairly long runway for. So we'll know that we're going to be working to 67, not 65.
I would jolly well hope so.
Yeah.
And again, don't forget, I'm still thinking 65 is the right number.
You are, yes.
But if that did happen, then I'm also hoping that you'll do your 67 and you'll have a better set of incentives around your own saving, right?
So it's a two-prong approach.
It really, well, the retirement income system is only 2 tiers here, and in some countries it's 3. So here it's NZ Super and voluntary saving. In some countries it's government pension, compulsory saving, and voluntary saving.
Right.
And the compulsory, that's what Australia's got.
There's so much uncertainty in the world at the moment. I told you earlier that I'm a big Radio New Zealand fan, so I turned the radio on at 6 o'clock and then despair of the world for the next hour or so. Retirement is also uncertain in terms of us not knowing what the world is going to look like in decades' time. But there are things that we can all be doing now to prepare ourselves, not for the uncertainty, but for the things that we know will happen. Employment will end, our family will continue to be around us, there are people we will want to support. So if you had some advice for people now, say in their 30s or 40s, what is the one thing that you think they should be thinking about or doing to plan for this future?
You're right about the state of the world at the moment. It's more uncertain than I've seen it, I think, possibly for my life, I'm not sure. And that affects mental health, that affects positivity. The only answer I've got to that is worry about the stuff within your control. One of the several things that are in your control is how you can manage your money.
Yeah.
Get a plan. Just get a plan. And then review it once a year. Yeah. Take a little bit of control. Go, what goals have I got for the next 30 years? Do I want to stop work at 50? Or do I want to be part of the FIRE movement?
That's Liv's thing. Amazing.
Do I think I'm going to work till 80 because I actually want to?
Because I enjoy what I do.
Because I enjoy what I do. Think about things like that. What kind of environment do I want for my kids if I've got kids, or my partner? And I think just remaining positive these days is the single best gift you can give yourself.
And those around you.
And how you can remain positive is being in control of the aspects of life you control. And controlling your money is one of those things.
Yeah. And you don't have to get everything sorted and be saving thousands immediately. You can start
Absolutely
small
not.
And just...
The earlier you are on your journey, the easier it is in inverted commas, because the longer you save, the more the magic of compound interest turns up, right? Your money will continue to grow no matter what you do to it, as long as you leave it alone. It's just how fast it grows. That's a question you've got to ask yourself.
Okay, well, I think that probably is enough. I could talk to you for longer, but we've covered a lot, and retirement is going to change, and hopefully the policy settings will adapt if they need to. Alongside that, there is a lot of uncertainty in the world, but we can't get swept away with that. We've just got to look at the things that we can control and just take a first step, learn a little bit more, read a book, listen to another podcast, and start to feel in control of your own financial situation. And that's just going to give you a sunnier outlook in general, isn't it?
Beautiful summary. I'm feeling very perky now.
Thanks very much for coming in, Jane, and we will get you in again if that's all right. Well, I think we've got another member of your team, Tom, who manages the Sorted website. We thought it would be great to get him in.
That's wonderful you've got Tom. And now Tom would have taken that 25-year-old Jane and really worked on
Given her a real shake. Okay, well, he can shake some of our listeners then. That'd be great. Thank you.
My pleasure.
This podcast contains personal opinions and is intended to provide educational information only. It doesn't relate to your particular financial situation or goals and is not financial advice or recommendations. Simplicity New Zealand Limited is the issuer of the Simplicity KiwiSaver scheme and investment funds. For product disclosure statements, please visit Simplicity's website, simplicity.kiwi.